When I started drawing, it was a big challenge to, draw even one type of figure. But what I really wanted to do was be able to draw all types of figures. Small characters, male characters, female characters, monsters, etc. This is one of the biggest struggles, I think, for an aspiring artist. And if this is something that you're struggling with, drawing different sizes of characters, especially when we're kind of drawing them from different angles, if you're drawing comics or manga or, for concept art, illustration, etc. What I want to do here is a simple drawing lesson and a simple demonstration to kind of talk about how I go about this. How do I actually do this? How do we sort of add a lot of musculature? How do we think about using a lot of the ideas and techniques that, again, we might find in a book such as Andrew Loomis's Figure Drawing for All It's Worth? And how do we connect this with actually drawing sort of fun, cool stuff, which is what we're all about on this channel? So, how do you apply that to something like, again, this type of cool art that you might see in a Breath of Fire art book, where, again, it's sort of stylized. We got different characters, right? Small characters, big characters, etc. How does that work? And what I also want to do in the end is, talk about how different artists use these things and, talk about how you might look at your favorite artists, So I've got some examples like Jeff Smith's Bone. We can look at sort of Masamune Shiro's Ghost in the Shell. We can look at some classic sort of Gil Kane artwork and just sort of look at, how do these concepts that, again, you might find in a book by Andrew Loomis or other constructive anatomy books, how do these things actually apply and how can you use them, especially with sort of big, chunky, muscular characters. One tip I'll share with you is that I think if we look at a lot of these artists, what you'll kind of find is that, not everyone uses all of the anatomy, not everyone uses all of the angles and the poses. People tend to have a little repertoire, and even the most amazing, famous artists that you might see, if you actually look at their work, I think what you'll find is, their abilities are a little bit more constrained than you might imagine, and that should give you confidence. Because what it means is you don't need to know how to draw every character from every angle. You need to kind of know maybe sort of how to do that in a pinch, but you as an artist who is an individual will figure out your own sort of repertoire for poses and your own way to kind of frame shots. And I think hopefully that will make this mountain seem a little bit more climbable, right? It's not quite as big a challenge as you might think, because although we might aspire to be able to draw anything, anywhere, anytime, and that is a good inspiration, that is a good thing to kind of aim for, often what you actually need to do is focus on how to learn anatomy so that you can actually create the pictures that you want right now. Anyway, this is a fun topic, so let's get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name's Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, you can learn through my quick start guide, where I go over the same techniques that I used for creating many of the comic books and concept art that I've created over the years, such as this ARA book that I created some time ago. Now, this quick start guide is aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop with a simple, reliable process. I go over all of the steps from the thumbnail to the finished image, and you'll also get all of the brushes and PSDs that are involved in that demonstration. It's free, link will be in the description. Go check it out. So one of the interesting things about learning anatomy and trying to get, this part of your artistic game really dialed in is that, as I said, even though we're often aspiring to this kind of medical grade style of anatomy, and that this does unlock a lot of your power as an artist to kind of understand how to do this. And also, as I said, your ability to kind of really be able to figure out how to draw anything, is something that, again, you'll learn to do if you really study your constructive anatomy, you study books like the Andrew Loomis books or, any other that really sort of, spark your interest. All of these things, again, are sort of aimed at this all-encompassing ability to kind of draw anything from any angle, which, again, is really useful. But a lot of people have very personal implementations of that, right? So again, if you look at the way someone like sort of Gil Kane is gonna, sort of really attack anatomy, it is very much based on that Western style of superhero art where, we're kind of drawing, like one type of character. And, that type of character is, the sort of standard, sort of human that looks like Superman, Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Spider-Man. Kind of, Spider-Man's often a little bit sort of more boyish, but either way, it's all kind of the same person. But, because it's just one person, the artists have the ability to really flex their muscles, pun kind of intended, and draw that character from all sorts of angles. And that's where you get the dynamism of that sort of Western comic book style. If you take an example of someone like, again, Masamune Shirou's Ghost in the Shell, you see that the focus is different, right? It's less about sort of showing these kind of crazy dynamic angles. He does show a lot of angles, but it's less focused on the anatomy, on the character, and it's more focused on, again, creating a world. So while his anatomical skills are very, very high, and you can see that from the work, right? There's a good sort of level of understanding there. The way that it's implemented is often a lot simpler, right? So we're not drawing every single striation of the muscle. We're not drawing all of those things. We're just kind of drawing, the general shape of it. And again, this is why it's so important for you to understand what your goals are as an artist and what you want your finished work to look like. So it's really worth looking at the particular artist that you admire and paying attention to how they do this. Where are they kind of, sort of glossing over details? What are they focusing on? What are they making the star of their particular show? Again, is it the overall world, right? Is it the mechs? Is it the, the car chases? There's often that stuff is actually, more dynamic than the characters in some of those panels. But again, whatever it is, it's important to understand that your journey and the way that you use these techniques is going to be specific to you, and it's important that you take control of that, right? And take that into your own sort of sphere of influence, right? So that you are making those decisions for you, not out of some artistic ego to kind of say, hey, I should be able to draw everything, like, oh, brah, I'm going to draw all the things, right? I'm going to be able to draw everything. Focus on actually creating a product or something that's interesting to you and having anatomical skills that will support your ability to create the things you want. Anyway, that's what I've done, and that's how I found a lot of success and enjoyment with this process. Anyway, that's enough of me ranting about this. Let me know in the comments if any of this stuff is sort of interesting. Let's jump over to the drawing table and get started. All right, and here we are at the drawing table. Tools for today are going to be some matte Blackwing pencils. I have a 2-stage Blackwing sharpener and a sort of putty eraser. And I think that is a Pentel brand putty eraser. The paper that I'm going to be sketching on is this one here, which is essentially a Strathmore 400 series smooth surface. And it's a pretty sort of good, drawing level paper. This is an awesome art book, one of my favorites, the Breath of Fire 4 art book. And again, there's a wide variety of different sizes of characters, right? So this is often what happens when you're working on a project, especially if it's a comic, right? You want all your characters to look different. You might even want to draw some, sort of creatures and things like that. If you would like me to see, break down some sort of different anatomical looks, creatures and stuff like that, let me know. That might be a fun video to do as well. But yeah, if you look at a lot of the characters, right, we've got the classic sort of Ryu character who is, pretty sort of standard for the anatomical sort of look on this particular project. But we also have, some, if we get to it, some sort of chunkier characters, right, that have, an obviously more muscular look. And I think we also have, some, robots and other things. So, you can use the Loomis method and, any type of basic constructive anatomy system to, help you draw this type of art, right? Again, sort of much taller character. And I think, again, there's often some, sort of really chunky characters as well, right? Monster characters and things like that they often have in these games. So yeah, that's basically the idea. What we want to do is kind of look at how we do that And yeah, it's pretty basic. We just use the same concept that we'd normally be using for a Loomis method or constructive anatomy, where we start with the skeleton or simplified sort of version of that skeleton. We often sort of refer to this as a mannequin, and then we sort of build on top of it. And I've done a few sort of videos in the past covering this idea and sort of going into it in a little bit more detail, but those are static, where, you know, we're just kind of drawing a pretty boring character. Let's look at kind of how we take these things and, you know, sort of put them into practice. So we're going to be thinking again about how to draw this from a different angle and how to put extra musculature on the character at the same time. All right, so to begin with, just to basically recap again, one of the primary things we're often trying to do when we're drawing things from different angles is to imagine how we would draw a box from different angles, because that is the simplest way to kind of help you start visualizing how these ideas function. This is a very, you know, sort of common method for sort of just describing these concepts. You may have seen the late Kim Jung-gi sort of, you know, talk about this concept, right? And this is why it's so important, right? It really is one of the foundational ideas that, you know, lets you kind of get your head around this and just kind of start to do it. So if you're looking for a few little sort of things to practice, just practice drawing some boxes. Again, not for hours and hours every day, you know, just for like 10 minutes every day, and see if you can kind of draw them so that they're obviously from, you know, very, very different angles, right? Above or below, etc. The major construction that I'm, you know, normally using and thinking about when it comes to drawing figures from above or below is this kind of plane, right? Which I've sort of talked about before. And yeah, that's where we sort of consider this kind of stick figure, right? This stick that we can think of as going up the middle of the character. And I really, you know, find that this is one of the most useful little sort of areas of construction to help us sort of visualize how that works. So again, I'm using the standard Loomis proportions. I'll put some links below in the description if you'd like to check out some, you know, more basic videos that sort of outline these proportions and also how you can apply them to manga, etc. In this one though, let's just focus on how to add mass and how to add mass while we're sort of looking at that character from again, a little bit more of an extreme angle. So we're going to draw the mannequin in there, and the mannequin really is just the simplest, easiest version of what you want to draw. It's a plan. It's a way that you sort of get your idea on the page sort of early on. So here in this case, again, we're visualizing that spine wrapping up, and I'm kind of trying to visualize the curvature of the spine to a certain degree. Now, again, that's a fairly advanced thing to do. I'm just sort of thinking about it in space as it kind of comes down from the neck, right? And then it's kind of going back out, right? And then it's sort of coming in there as it kind of meets that pelvis. We can think about this from a very sort of simple construction, again, as being, okay, here we have like a, you know, a simple sphere that might be for the rib cage. And up here is the top of the rib cage, right? Top of the rib cage. And then I sort of have that curve there, right? And no matter sort of what angle we draw that from, what I'm actually visualizing is this center line around that torso, right? And again, we won't do this for all the marks that I'm making, but if you want another little sort of mini exercise, it's just to, again, map geometry onto simple forms. Oh, that one went off the page. Right, so just draw some, you know, spheres and try and sort of, you know, draw almost a grid upon that sphere. If a sphere is a little bit complicated, again, start with a box. Boom, 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 boom. And yeah, just practice, you know, super basic, right? Thinking about where all of those hidden lines are. And what we're trying to find often are these hidden lines within that geometry. If you think about a cube, again, often what we're trying to do is find like a center line along there, and visualizing where that is. So, and that really is, you know, the key to sort of being able to draw the mannequin from different angles, is just getting much better at your constructive anatomy, which is the concept that underlies a lot of the Loomis method and these other methodologies. So we're just drawing our little stick figure here. Boom, boom. Got sort of some arms. Let's put that one in a decent position, and I'm just being sort of pretty rough. Now, what we want to do, as I often say with a mannequin, is increase the ease at which we can sort of guesstimate these forms. So I'm going to put in some big sort of shoulders, because this is going to be a much sort of bigger character, right? I'm going to sort of rough in the neck there, and I'm also going to put a few massing in shapes for the forearms, right? Again, much bigger than mine here. Right, and again, same sort of thing here. Think about big thighs, right? Some sort of spheres for the calves. Now, none of this has to be super accurate at this point. What we're trying to do is visualize and start to get in your mind a feeling for like where all these spaces will be. So, you know, this might be a little bit to the left, it might be a little bit to the right, but it's kind of giving me a feel for, you know, where all of that stuff needs to be. Now again, as we increase the stylization of the character and we sort of make them larger, mostly what we're doing is just kind of adding bulk, right? And again, you sort of do this to taste and experiment and play until you find lines that are fun for you, shapes that are fun. You can copy other artists' kind of versions of these sort of anatomical markers and play around with that. That can be a great way of, you know, sort of learning yourself. But again, in this case, I'm going to draw, you know, pretty sort of standard human, right? Might try could try a sort of female as well, maybe. Again, just keeping these simple, right? Boom, boom. And now what I'm doing is doing a mix of form drawing, a mix of me just kind of, you know, knowing where a lot of these lines are going to go. And really, as I often say as well on this channel, that really the way that you put in these forms is going to be a mix of both your understanding of, hey, look, can I just go in there and wing it, right? Do I actually need to go in there and construct it? Versus, like, if you get lost, you can sort of say, okay, what's happening here, right? I got a deltoid, right? The deltoid is going in front of the pectoral muscle. The bicep is going underneath that, and you can actually start to kind of separate out some of these muscles, right? Draw them in a little bit more detail. Boom, boom, right? And, you know, think about, okay, where's our elbow? Somewhere here, right? And then I've got some bones going there. Got some muscles wrapping around, right? And you know, again, play around with it. But essentially, you know, if you're just drawing fairly sort of stylized comic booky things, you're going to do a mix of exaggerating, of looking at your anatomical models, right? So again, you know, if you are drawing that chest, part of what we're doing is, again, thinking about, okay, the bicep sort of goes in there underneath the deltoid and the pectoral. You know, again, the pectoral and the deltoid muscles are kind of like one big mass, right? But visually, it's often a little bit easier to sort of consider that, you know, the deltoid kind of sort of goes on top of the pectoral muscle. If you need to draw this line, right, we often draw the pectoral muscle kind of slipping underneath the deltoid. But again, a lot of those things are to taste. You sort of experiment. So I'm sort of massing in and finding some of these forms. So I've found center, right, boom, drawing it down there. And again, I'm sort of tucking this back in there. I can visualize that rib cage. Right, again, sort of visualizing lines crossing around the rib cage. Again, still finding center. And again, have a go at, you know, putting in some of this musculature. Now, again, having one of these tools, or a 3D version of like a a traditional artistic écorché can really help. But also just a little bit of quick reference can sort of help. Whatever you find kind of really works for you. So again, this is a pretty sort of standard pose we've got here. And again, the character's kind of, pretty sort of chunky. Now, I guess the question is, how do we sort of repeat that? How do we make it bigger? How do we make it, more exciting? How do we sort of, draw some poses and sort of keep that going? So first, to do that, we need to come up with some interesting poses from, the stick figure sort of stage, right? So again, let's try do a few of those. Let's try do a more of like sort of an upshot. Now again, there's many different sort of ways to play around with this, and you can sort of think about sort of gestural drawing, but it can be really useful to just sort of put in a grid or something that is gonna again, I'm gonna play around with it, put it make it sort of super distorted. So this is not a proper perspective grid by any means. This is not based on anything. This is just me sort of again trying to draw a box and say, hey, let's really try and draw a box that's sort of gonna have us sort of looking up at a character. Now again, this is also not some perfect drawing technique. This is just a visualization technique that might help you. If I'm doing this, mostly what I'm going to do is again find a few sort of lines that are going to sort of tell me where the general direction is going. And again, then mostly what I'm after is to sort of think about how the character is connected to the ground and where sort of the torso is kind of sitting, right? So in this case, again, I'll often sort of start with that torso and think about where it's going to be placed. So in this case, again, let's sort of draw that, right? The sort of bean of the torso. So a lot of people like to describe it. And we can try also some sort of foreshortening maybe. Again, let's sort of draw this leg coming at us. Draw that other one there. Again, we've got calf, right, knee. This pencil's getting a little bit sort of sharp, blunt. And again, do the same thing. Right, I could probably go up a little bit. Let's think about and visualize the fact that the elbow often lines up with the bottom of the rib cage. All right, let's visualize again that line going round the back. Right, and in this case, again, we'll have the character looking kind of this way. So again, I'm not really using this grid in any way, shape, or form, but visual, like in any real technical way. Again, like I have a pretty good understanding of technical perspective, and to me, this is like just kind of kindergarten stuff in terms of what you could do if you really wanted to sort of nut it out. But in most cases, you just need enough to visualize what you're doing. Because again, the goal is not to draw perfect perspective. The goal is to draw people that are sort of doing stuff, right, and are kind of interesting. So again, what we'll do is think about how we can make those masses and muscles a little bit sort of bigger. So again, I'm doing all the same things that I was doing before. But again, I'll just do them a little bit quicker so we can sort of move through it, and hopefully we can sort of demonstrate it. So again, this lesson is a little bit more demonstration, just talking about it. And yeah, if you do have any questions, right, just leave them in the comments, or I'll see if I can do some other videos. So still trying to find again, like the sort of feeling of what, right, where this rib cage is in space. right? And sort of what it looks like. And that's why, again, it's often so good to put these sort of contour lines around something, right? And really think about the cylindrical logic of the forms that you're creating, right? So this is where, again, we sort of visualize the cross sections of a cylinder, or a cylinder that's been sort of stretched, and this allows us to kind of imagine where they are in space. Again, this is a visualization tool, and it helps you if you need it. You don't need to do this every time. You can just sort of draw the shape if you understand where it is in three-dimensional space. But the more you can sort of plan it if you need to, the better your life will be. So again, drawing some sort of chunky characters. Now again, we're still in sort of, relatively speaking, right, comic book style, realistic proportions. If you look at a lot of the, again, that sort of great Capcom art, there often are, characters that really, really push the boundaries. But this is sort of where it would kind of start in many cases, right? We can put some quick sort of fingers on here, right? Thumb there, boom, 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 boom. And again, that's sort of foreshortened, right? I feel this knee now probably, needs to be a little bit bigger, right? And again, with those legs from a form perspective, again, I really am just thinking about sort of like a drumstick, right? We've got like the knee here, got a big kind of drumstick here, boom. And then, right, the legs that it continues on, and we've got another drumstick for the boom, for the calf, right? Again, that's very sort of crude, but that's kind of how I'm sort of thinking about it, right? We've got the bone, knee, drumstick. Again, it's not perfect anatomy, but it'll sort of get you there. One of the things that's interesting is that, often drawing more exaggerated anatomy is actually a little bit easier. So, it can be a little bit easier to start with, those big, muscly anatomical models, even if you don't really aspire to do that, because it helps you to identify the characters, right? And those particular muscles that those characters have. So again, still keeping this pretty rough. All right, let's draw in the ball of the foot. Don't know what this character is sort of doing necessarily. Maybe they're kind of jumping or running. They're doing that kind of superhero thing, which is where, again, people just kind of float around. Right, got heel, boom. Ball of the foot. So yeah, again, here we can sort of see, I've got my Loomis head. Still a pretty, basic anatomical model, right? Can we push this more? Yes, we can, right? We know that people can bodybuild and get sort of huge. We know it's sort of possible. Again, just roughing in where that face would be. Not really using the Loomis method that much. I'm just sort of roughing that in by eye. But again, if this was bigger and you needed to sort of really figure that out, then again, that would be pretty sort of easy to do as well, using the Loomis method on this character. So let's look at again a few more sort of examples, and we'll see if we can again like really push it, and get something that's kind of maybe a little bit more fun in terms of proportion, right? Now, where should we do that? Let's do that over here, and I'll move my chair so I'm a little bit more over the top of this. Let's sharpen our pencil. Always remember, sharpen your pencil, or have a bunch of them that are half sharpened. All right, so let's keep with that idea of, again, looking up at the character. So again, what I need from a visualization standpoint, it is kind of like, where that horizon line is, right? So we can call this horizon line. Right, we can call this kind of the top of the figure, and down here we sort of have the bottom of the figure, right? So again, it's not really perspective, but it's some guidelines that give me a decent indication. And we're just going to divide up this figure. But again, in this case, I'm going to really see if I can sort of exaggerate those proportions. And we'll see if we can kind of add a little pose first. But again, often when I'm roughing it in, just start with a real basic version of that sort of anatomy. Again, let's try, boom, boom. Again, having some sort of legs. Thinking about where that character is sort of positioned on the ground. Right. Don't. Boom. Right. So again, the leg is up on something, right? Maybe it could be a box. Right. And we've got a little grid here that we could maybe, sort of use for that box. I've got a pretty good idea of where some of those lines would be. And, honestly, yeah, drawing boxes that people are sitting on and seeing if you can match the perspective is another really sort of good thing to do. So again, in this case, what I want to do is see if I can really sort of mass in some form that's going to be a lot bigger. Let's just always remember, right? Let's sort of draw in some of these lines. You can draw them in super faint. They'll just really always help you to sort of stay honest. All right, let's really sort of push out that chest. Right, think about what the form is there. And, right, let's still keep the head there, and we'll see if we can make the head. Where should we? Again, let's point that head to the side there. So we've got one of these sort of absurdly muscled sort of characters that often just look a bit embarrassing, really. Unless you're in some cool, again, shonen style manga where everyone's just huge, in which case it sort of tends to look normal. All right, so again, I'm not putting in these yet, but I've got a good idea for where they should be. Now, let's play with. Let's play with that sort of anatomy, right? Again, I'm always like, what do we have these people doing? Boom. And just make sure that we again got to at this point double, triple check, right? How big those limbs need to be, etc. Again, I could find. Let's double check that, right? Let's sort of say. All right, we want to make sure that this one, yeah, I feel like that is getting a bit big, right? Let's make them a little bit shorter. So just double, triple check your proportions. Can be easy to let this stuff get out of hand. So what I'm doing here is, again, I'm trying to visualize. My skeleton figure keeps losing hands. I'm trying to visualize these arcs, right? If we imagine this arm, right, kind of raises up, right? I'm sort of thinking about like, okay, how long is it from here to here? Right, how long is that bone? We got one of these arms, so we can sort of look at it, right? So how big is this distance, right? So that's often what we're trying to visualize. I'm trying to find some anatomical markers that work. Now, people can have really long arms, but look, not that long, right? So I'm sort of saying, okay, this is what the sort of muscle looks like now, but I know that again, the bottom of this elbow lines up with the navel, which again is going to line up with the bottom of the rib cage. And, so I'm sort of looking for this proportion, right? And then I'm sort of thinking about where it goes in space. Now, again, you can calculate that, or you can guesstimate that, or whatever. But again, I'm sort of looking for like, okay, sort of up here to here, right? So that's why, again, I was sort of looking at that arc, right? And again, it sort of means, again, we're going to have an elbow that's a little bit more like this, right? And again, what I'm trying to do is mass in those shapes, just so I can sort of say, hey, look, does that look right? Right, again, let's see if we can get that looking pretty decent. And again, I'm sort of trying to visualize this, except in this case, what it's doing is going out, right? So the character, if we were to look at it from above, would actually be a really good way to sort of figure this out. And that is where, again, constructive anatomy really helps. What I can try and do is sort of, use the measurement on the ground, right, to kind of figure out, right, like how far out should this go, right? And that might give me a pretty good indication. Or you can just sort of guesstimate. And again, the more you try this, the better you will be able to guesstimate. So again, you could sort of just try drawing that pectoral. Right, let's give it some mass as well. Boom. Or I could try and mass it in, right? Again, that'll sort of help me. Here I've got, again, that sort of deltoid, right? If the shoulder is here, right, it's probably going to be, and it's sort of raised up a little bit, then again, it's probably going to be a little bit higher. We're going to have that kind of mass, right? And we're going to have, boom, like some sort of elbow here, right? So you can see, again, I'm using like a mix of different things to get that result. Again, we can mass in our, right, drumsticks. That'll give us a rough idea at least. Like, does that look any good, right? Does that make sense? All right, let's find center. Boom. So I'm kind of avoiding those arms because, again, I'm not quite 100% sure. Actually, let's try something a little bit more. Again, I have them both up. Is that it's always that little trick that, again, I sort of read in like those Disney books, right? The Illusion of Life, and it says don't have twins, don't have your both arms doing the same thing. So I'm just going to get above this very quickly and see if we can sort of visualize some of these things that are going on, right? Make sure I don't get sort of stuck with some sort of awkward anatomy. Because again, when we're pushing things, that's where you really want to, right? You really want to make sure you know what you're doing. So again, we've got that bicep, right? Sort of there. Some sort of muscle like this. So again, I can sort of rough it in, and then I can sort of have a go at doing a better job of it later. And again, sort of with a sort of bodybuilder's pose there. Now again, that's not sort of perfect anatomy. But again, it's going to give us a good start. And if you're ever sort of stuck here and you're sort of thinking like, how do I figure that out? The answer is often that just see if you can get some actual reference of someone doing that particular pose. You don't need to get reference of exactly that angle, but just like what happens to the arm when you do that, right? Like what happens to that particular muscle when you do that. So here's where, again, we're going to get a lot of sort of foreshortening, right? And I want to make sure that we sort of get this in right. So again, thinking about where that sort of bicep will be there, right? Again, what is the rough shape of that arm? And then again, let's sort of think about what are they going to be doing? Maybe they're holding something. Again, you can think about this, if you're just playing around as like life drawing style, right? Where people often hold a stick, and that sort of stick is just there to, sort of be like, hey, if someone was holding something, this is kind of how that would go. Right, do a rough little hand there. right? Got bicep, deltoid, right? Chest, pectorals, center, and yeah, again, sort of, I feel like I've kind of got the sort of figured out this bit a little bit more. Again, this is just comic book anatomy, right? So, you know, if you're sort of thinking like, oh, you know, that's like a little bit off, and I'm like, yeah, I totally hear you, right? Again, the goal here is to, you know, do as much as we can, and you know, be able to do a pretty good job without reference, because, you know, sometimes you have, you know, 10, 20 figures you've got to draw on a page. You might have to do a concept art with a street scene in it, and you got all these characters. Now, they don't matter that much. If you can do a pretty good job at them quickly, that's where, you know, you're going to start to, you know, see real benefits, right? Your work will just tend to feel as if, you know, it's a little bit more fleshed out. Your background characters will feel, you know, as if they're a little bit better, right? As if they're a little bit more interesting. And, you know, it's often those things which, you know, which make the difference, right? Lots of people can sort of draw the big, you know, cool scenes, right? And, you know, it's sort of possible to, you know, do a pretty good job. You know, you can do 3D, you know, you can do all sorts of, you know, methods for doing it. But again, you know, just being able to add life to figures really quickly is hugely beneficial. But again, you know, depending on your goals, certainly mine are never to, you know, make this look hyper realistic. So again, he's looking like pretty chunky. And again, if we were doing like a real sort of close up of that, I probably need to do another pass on, you know, some of that stuff. Some of this anatomy is not looking that, like, you know, super accurate. But you know, mostly what that would be is just, you know, getting this guy, doing another pass, you know, sort of looking at how, you know, how we could sort of implement those different sort of musculature, you know, bits of information in there, you know, see how we can get it. And, you know, we can try and, you know, add some extra mass there, right? Because I feel like, again, once you've sort of got it right, it's a matter of sort of thing like, you know, what do the shapes look like, right? We've kind of got a pretty good idea of the overall kind of look, but yeah, you know, what do the shapes look like? Do we need more legs, right? This leg here is looking pretty pathetic in comparison to everything else. And yeah, you know, you can refine it, but you know, I would say from an exercise point of view, again, you know, practice doing different things, right? We wanna make sure that you know, we can do you know, sort of detailed versions of this or just kind of rough versions of this. Again, I think you'll find they're both very sort of beneficial, right, from an anatomical and practical sort of standpoint. But yeah, so hopefully that gives you a few ideas of kind of how we can sort of apply these things, draw some characters with a little bit more mass. Again, you know, it might be fun in another one to, you know, exaggerate this further, you know, make some of the characters a little bit more cartoony. You know, I always try and stick a little bit to the realistic proportion because, you know, that way we can all sort of follow along and, you know, sort of be looking at something that's a little bit similar. Whereas, you know, maybe in some other ones I'll do, you know, really lean into the manga style or, you know, again, that sort of Capcom exaggerated anatomy. But yeah, so that's the basic idea for the demo. What we'll do next is, again, just sort of look at how different artists kind of, you know, from my view, implement this and maybe give you some practical advice that you can take away and sort of understand how do you apply this to your work. How much of this do you need to learn? How important is it? How, all those little details. So let's look at that now. So if we look at, again, something that's a little bit more cartoony, again, one of my favorite books, when I was sort of, hanging out at the comic book store was, back in the early days. I don't go into comic book stores that much these days, but I really, really loved Jeff Smith's Bone. And, you can kind of see that, that there's a huge amount of articulation and, feeling of sort of character. Again, it's a little bit more of that sort of animation Disney-esque kind of look. Really, really strong graphic impact. But again, I think often what you need to understand is, when you see art that you really, really like, just kind of have a little bit of a closer look and, see like how often are you actually needing to draw really, really crazy angles. I think what you find is the majority of your time you're going to be drawing, fairly sort of standard angles, right? Might be a little bit above, a little bit below. You do need to, know how to sort of handle those, but, often we're just drawing face panels, sort of people just kind of standing around, and that's where, again, what you want to be able to do is just kind of create those scenes and those drawings relatively quickly and, do a pretty good job. And, there might be other situations where, we're dealing with the, much more sort of exaggerated poses and running sort of poses and stuff like that. And again, all of those things are important as well. But yeah, just sort of check out art that you really like and sort of figure out how much constructive anatomy and how much you have to actually work towards, looking at different poses to sort of get that sort of same effect. Because it depends on what kind of style you're actually interested in. For instance, if we look at some sort of more classic Gil Kane art, then you can see that, that there is a real focus on being able to draw characters from a variety of angles in these kind of, more sort of old, typical superhero style comic books, right? So, if you're sort of thinking about this type of work, that which again feels to me much more sort of Western superhero centric, then yeah, it is super important to be able to draw characters from all sorts of angles, right, and really, really sort of get into it. And I think again, there's many good examples here where you can see the artist is just able to pick really, really interesting sort of dynamic angles that have that real exaggerated dynamic feel. And again, that follows through from the superhero stuff again to sort of the fantasy kind of stuff here. It's interesting, you can see pretty cool example of kind of the rough versus the finish there. Yeah, but again, pay attention to all of these things when you're looking at not just your favorite artists, but look at the artists that they sort of are inspired by, because you often see there's actually standard poses that people are kind of ripping off each other and sort of using, right? Because it just has that kind of really, really nice dynamic feel. And I think often you can find that going back to the source material of your favorite artist is a good way to kind of be able to draw from the same inspiration without sort of directly sort of copying them, again, if that's sort of something that you're sort of interested in. But again, if you are doing this, it does seem like every panel and everything just has a dynamic, different view of the human anatomy. Now, it's important to notice that, again, what you see in a lot of this Western superhero art is not a lot of variety of anatomy, right? So everyone kind of looks pretty much the same, but there's a huge variety in the way that they're posed. And again, that's one of the major advantages of that style and the advantages of sort of drawing that type of work. Again, although you can see, again, Gil Kane was, like a real sort of master and, was able to draw all sorts of stuff. If we look at, another example that's kind of interesting, Masamune Shirow's Ghost in the Shell, you can see that, again, there's a really, really big variety of different angles that people are drawn from. And, it does sort of feel like, again, there's good sort of variety here. But again, there's less focus on that kind of superhero style anatomy. It's more important that, we're just kind of drawing, the hands and the feet, and everyone's sort of pretty sort of standard. But, still we've got, angles from above, angles from front, right? Again, slightly above, really sort of playing with that. And again, there's lots and lots of sort of examples of, the cars being very dynamic, the characters being very dynamic. So, even when you've got, the Kusanagi is in the, sort of bodysuit kind of look, then, it's still pretty simple, right? We're not sort of trying to draw all the muscles. But again, there's a pretty good understanding of, the general proportion. So one of the real tricks there is that often, depending on what you need to do, it's important to focus on different things. And, you can really get amazing results without knowing exactly where all the muscles go. Most of the time, a lot of artists are actually just using the proportional markers, right? So again, great understanding of anatomy. You can see that, again, there's great skill there. But again, most of what, someone like Shiro is going to do is really just focus on general proportion, getting the angles right, and, really being able to kind of draw anything. There's so much dynamism in all these panels. These really cool low shots, right, high shot, everything's drawn from sort of different angles. But again, we're not sort of looking at that same level of kind of, drawing all the striations of the bicep, right, that you would see in the Western superhero sort of like genre of art. So again, it's really a matter of you figuring out what works for you. Anyway, hopefully this one has been interesting. Just a little sort of relatively quick demo, just sort of talking about this issue because I think someone mentioned it in the comments. And that's mostly how I'm sort of, trying to find a lot of these sort of smaller demo ideas. I'm just looking at the comments and sort of trying to find it. Again, I don't always get a chance to reply to all the comments, but I see them all. I appreciate them all. And anything where someone's asking for something, it sticks in my head, and I try and sort of think about making a video of it sort of later on. So hopefully this one hit that mark. If not, if you're like, no, I want more extreme angles or whatever it is, just let me know. I'd be super keen to hear your thoughts on these sort of topics and what you're struggling with, how you're going with your artistic journey. Let me know in the comments. But other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.